The UN Security Council adopted a resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza yesterday, and the US abstained, as we heard from my colleague Sharon Raspies, who was watching these developments in the UN Security Council for us. Now, some have welcomed this particular decision, but others are cautiously optimistic, and they say that they are wondering if, both parties, in fact, not even both, all parties in this particular story are going to, adhere to some of the what is being said here in the resolutions in this latest development. So let's speak to Thamsanqa Malusi, legal analyst, who's joining us live now. Thank you so much for your time. So let's start with your reaction to the developments, especially around the UN Security Council.
Yeah, I think it's positive. You will recall that there was at least 3 other resolutions of this nature that the UN Security Council tried to pass, specifically requiring an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, but they've all failed. The first two failed because the US vetoed those decisions. The last one, I think it was last week, failed because Russia and China vetoed that resolution, and the reason for that was given by those two countries for that veto was that the language that had been proposed, particularly around Hamas, was not accurate, and so that's why they did not go through with that one. But it certainly is a positive step, but it is limited in that the ceasefire is only for the month of Ramadan, which there's only 2 weeks left of that month. So it is positive, but it is still, I think there's still more that could have been done.
And you touched on an important point. There's some saying that they wish it had, lasting impacts. But one of the other things that has been said about this latest resolution is that some are doubting whether or not it can be implemented. And I wonder, do you think that it can be enforceable? It can be implemented? We can see a change on the ground?
Yeah, as a starting point, resolutions of the United Nations, the UN Security Council in particular, are binding international resolutions. So Article 25 of the UN Charter specifically states that if all members of the UN must comply with resolutions of the Security Council. So as a starting point, yes, it is binding, but the US has created a lot of confusion because its ambassador in the Security Council had stated that this is not a binding resolution, and I'm not sure why they made that statement. My suspicion it was only to placate Israel, but resolutions are binding. Whether or not they get carried out is a different question altogether, because there's a lot of resolutions of the Security Council that are not carried out, particularly when they affect countries that that are allies to the so-called Western countries or the most powerful countries. So yes, it's binding, but the question is whether or not it will be enforced, and that's something to be seen.
I suppose then, Thamsanqa, we then ask, is it worth the paper it's written on then?
Yeah, I think yes, because, there are beyond, the enforceability question, this is a strong condemnation from, the highest body of the United Nations in terms of, international law, international security and peace. So it is quite, there are far-reaching consequences potentially for Israel when there's such a strong statement from the Security Council itself, which include, by the way, the United States of America, which had for a long time protected and shielded Israel against resolutions of this nature. It did not vote in favor of this latest resolution. It simply abstained from it. But even that on its own is still powerful. And I think it will make the relations between those two allies very frosty.
So, Thamsanqa, how then do we process, these latest developments in the UN Security Council and what has been taking place in the ICJ?
So if you'll remember, the South African case actually before the ICJ was, amongst other things, it wanted a pronouncement on an immediate ceasefire. The ICJ did not grant that relief. Instead, it said, there is a plausible case of genocide that has taken place in Gaza. But instead of ordering an immediate ceasefire as South Africa had asked for. It simply said that countries must comply with their international obligations. Now, that is open to interpretation. A lot of people said that was an actual ceasefire, but be that as it may, Israel has continued its military operation in the Gaza Strip. Now, this latest resolution from the Security Council, which is a different organ of within the UN structure, has said that there should be an immediate ceasefire. It also said, this resolution, that there should be an immediate release of all hostages. So that is a strong pronouncement on the ceasefire question, which, as I said before, should be complied with because resolutions of the United Nations are binding in nature. But we'll see if whether or not Israel will comply.
Thamsanqa, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for breaking it down for us this evening. Do appreciate your insights.